Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and online role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, we'll be looking at the 4th adventure path module for the War for the Crown Pathfinder campaign. This one is called City in the Lion's Eye. Switch on over to Roll20. Hello! So, this one is designed for 10th level PCs who have obviously completed the first 3 modules in the War for the Crown adventure path. So we're getting to solid tier 3 difficulty rating. And this one feels really similar to the last one, the Twilight Child, which going back and looking over that review, I really liked Twilight Child. I called it the best one of the bunch of the 3 that were so far. Had a ton of maps, had a really cool flow with the urban exploration and the clues and the gathering of evidence. That was all really cool. This one basically does the same thing but worse, which is really disappointing. It does the exact same, like go to a city and gather evidence in order to take down a big bad. This one does have a much stronger third act than the last one did. And in fact, it's a pretty huge dungeon crawl that gives the PCs kind of a nice like free reign on how they want to tackle it, which I like all that. So I think that's the strongest part of the module. But the first part is poorly done, seems underdeveloped, and the second part is just almost exactly like the last module, but just less. There's less of everything, and there's less maps, which is a bummer for Roll20 purposes. So we're going to take a look at this adventure. First, let's talk about what all you actually get, because I like to break down what is included in this module. Though by now, if you're doing the adventure path, you're probably going to keep on buying these modules. But I think it's fun to review these just for funsies too, to look at them. You get 3 5-foot battle maps with dynamic lighting for Roll20 Pro subscribers. Only 3. That's a big step down from other ones. By the way, you're going to see me looking at other maps up here. This is all of the War for the Crown so far. They're actually adding each one gets added to the existing module. You don't have to worry about carrying characters over from one to the others. It's all in the same Roll20 campaign. So I just haven't gone through and like archived all of these. So you're going to see a big old bar here by the time this stuff is done. But right now, it's just these right here is the actual 4th one that you get. So you get these 3 right here are the 3-foot battle maps. You get one 10-foot battle map that does have the 5-foot subdivision, so it just kind of looks tinier, but everything is still formatted correctly. You get the one non-gridded city map, which at this point, almost all of them have taken place. I think literally all but the second one have taken place within basically a single city, and they all have, the standard city map. You get 54 unique NPC character sheets with matching tokens and GM descriptions, 22 of which have picks and player handouts. This campaign in general has a whole bunch of characters because, again, you're like in a city dealing with actual named NPCs. So there's a bunch here under, let's see, bestiary, and then it's got NPCs are your unique named ones, and then creatures and monsters are your generics, of which we have 43 NPC monster sheets down here. And then I actually counted the Rakshasas as a separate one because you get 10 of them. An interesting thing is, so I'm not terribly familiar with Pathfinder these days because I've pretty much gone almost all the way to D&D, but I didn't realize that Rakshasa could actually be basically any kind of shape-shifting demon that can have a different kind of head, like an anthropomorphized head. Because in D&D, I think it's specifically like tigers. They're tiger demons, or demons that look like anthropomorphized tigers, But in here, they can actually be everything. It can be like a crocodile head or a goat head or whatever else. That's really cool. And the fact that they use like quite a bit of these Rakshasas here in this campaign really well is nice. But on the other hand, I feel like a lot of the ones in this campaign, the modules and monsters, have already been utilizing the whole like this NPC is actually like a demon monster in disguise. Like that's been used over and over and over again. And I get that this is a very political thriller, subterfuge, spy game. Those are all themes, but man, if I was a player, I'd just assume like everybody is just a demon in disguise at this point. And that's very much used here quite a bit. you do get excuse me, the token page, which is pretty standard now. Includes all of the monsters that you will need. Some of the R's are already built in, which is nice. 130 magic item player handouts, and I think this is a case of the fact that because the adventures just keep getting added to the same campaign, you just keep adding all those magic items in and keeping the old ones. So I think that number is just going to continue to balloon out of control by the time we finish this campaign. Which, hey, I'd rather have more than less. So that's cool. But tons of magic items here. You can see only 31 of which have pictures, unfortunately, which is a bit of a bummer. What else do you get? Available as an existing add-on. We knew that already. The journal is organized into 3 parts, so a little smaller than the last module, in fact. You do get extra notes and lore on Zimar, which is the town that we're going to be in. Rakshasas, which I just mentioned how they're a big part of it, and the Lion Blades, which is like this region's like CIA, FBI, insert whatever your country's secret government organization is of like spy networks. That your PCs basically officially join. That's like part 1 is literally they go to like the Jedi Academy of Lion Blades, which seems weird to have to do it like 10th level. Like you have to go to like training. That's weird. And then finally you get rollable tables for optional random encounters in and around Zamar, as well as rollable tokens for the shapeshifters, of which, as I mentioned, there are a lot. All right, let's go over the story. So briefly, and it's easiest to go with the adventure background. What are they? They do a nice little breakdown on all of these. That's not the background. Seeing the lion's eye. There we go. Part 1. The road to Zimar literally is just getting the PCs to the town they need to be in. There is 2 main parts to that. One of them is they go to this, what is it called? The Kitharodian Academy. Probably butchered that. Where they train to be members of the Lion Blades, which is a neat concept to go and basically turn it into a bunch of checks and stuff. And by the way, I can't show this on a map because there are no maps for part 1. I repeat, there are no maps for part 1. I guess we can look at this page. But your PCs basically travel here first. They meet up with an agent, which is a cool little callback from part 1. One of the kind of random agents that ends up helping your characters in part 1, helps like protect and save them. She ends up coming back and is like recruiting them. It's like, oh, you guys have done some good work here. Let's recruit you guys to be members of the Lion Blades, essentially. And you go to this academy, and it's a fun little jaunt. Like, where are we? It's broken up between events, and it's just a whole bunch of like trials and tests that you go through, and a lot of them are like trials on like questioning, like how to avoid questions, how to fight better. It's not bad. It's a lot of skill checks, and they can choose like which ones they want to bolster and all that, and they can get there are rewards by getting infiltration inspiration, which they can add like a d6 to something if they can complete enough events. That's all nice. It just feels weird to throw that at 10th level players. Like, we're gonna throw you into this thing where you have to like train how to do everything. Like, if I was a PC, I'd be like, what the fuck? We've been doing this for how many hours of sessions now? I'm 10th level. I'm feeling pretty confident about my abilities, and we've been doing a lot of this same stuff, and now I need to go do this. Now, granted, this is a little more stealth and subterfuge than maybe they've been doing, or maybe it's not. I don't know. It just feels... I like the concept. It just feels weird to do this in the 4th module and not, like, the 2nd one. But either way, they complete that. They go to an inn, I believe. It's the tiny hamlet of Panamona, 15 miles northeast of Zimar. And here they meet up with essentially the smuggler who's going to smuggle them into the city. And there's a nice little altercation here where this character gives your PCs a bunch of fake IDs. And all the IDs have very specific descriptions and notes of what their occupation is. And this is really fun. And this is really in keeping in theme with the module, which is you're not shock and awe, you're not breaking down doors, you're not fighting everybody, you're working within the system, you're being spies. Like, you really are being spies and detectives here, which is nice. And I think that's an interesting challenge, is to make people take on these other roles, kind of force everybody to be disguise, and there's a lot of fun skill checks in that. And then of course when you're still at the inn, there's a bunch of guards that come in and bust down the door, and they're looking to capture your smuggler, and you have to protect them, and that's a nice scene. There are no maps or handouts for this either. Nothing. There's nothing I can show you visually. That's horrible. What is going on? I was horrified to see this, that there's absolutely no visual stuff for part 1 at all. So part 1 again includes that entire academy training sequence, of which there is definitely combat there. You fight like, you put on literally these like Jedi style helmet masks, and then like shadows appear and you fight them. And then that whole thing at the inn where there's definitely, if not combat, at least a hostile encounter. And then at the city gates is technically part of part 1, is when your characters actually try to get in and they have to pass by using their false IDs, essentially. There's no maps for any of that. That sucks. It really, really sucks. It's bad. That's bad. The content isn't bad, but that for Roll20 purposes, that's really unfortunate. There's just nothing there. All these windows have opened up. So that's part 1. There's some fun stuff there, and I like the idea, but there's no maps or even player handouts. There's not even a visual aid I can show, just aside from the pictures of the people. Like Cathan is the woman that's a great art. I love that picture because they can do the disguise stuff. She's the kind of the Lion's Blade agent that helps sponsor you guys. There's still no art though. So part 2 is you make it inside the city, and your only lead is a single Lion Blade agent. I guess I can switch over to the actual city map because we do have that map, thank goodness. So part 2, we finally get to the maps. All right, that's way too big. As much as I like Pathfinder art, I'm really not into their maps. Just the actual like overland city maps. Those are always the weakest to me. I don't know. It just seems this doesn't seem very interesting. It's not visually pleasing compared to the actual like this art. All their like action art is really cool, basically, and their like monster art is nifty. The overland maps of like farms and shit, I don't know, not so much. But part 2, your lead is there's a single Lion Blade who is still like feeding information. He's like the only one left in this city because so the villain is what's his name? Pitharis, something Maxilar Pitharius, which is a name that which is a major villain that your character should recognize all the way back from the first module. And that's a big strength of this campaign, is the fact that that first like Senate scene in part 1 really introduced a lot of the NPCs that you continue to interact with throughout. Although I will say this is probably the most, I was going to say the most majorist villain, the biggest villain that you've encountered, and you actually do kind of deal with him at the end of this one. So I'm interested to see like who becomes the actual final villain for part 5 and 6, because I actually thought this was that essentially he's the general of the main army, and then during the succession it's between Eutropia, which is the princess that is fighting for her right to be the next ruler, and whom your characters are working for, against this general who is in charge of the military and is anti-her and wants to rule instead. So he is the primary, really, antagonist throughout the campaign up until this point. You've been dealing with kind of smaller lords, and now you're going after the big fish. And he is here in this city. So this is why you have to sneak in. This is the militarized capital of Taldor, the region, and your characters are in hostile waters, which that is really interesting, because there's an actual suspicion point system. Your characters can't just walk around asking questions. They will accrue these suspicion points, which this is a really fun system. As species draw attention to themselves, they accumulate suspicion points as a group, and it imposes penalties on basically all their persuasion and diplomacy checks as they kind of ask around and gather information. And you're actually supposed to keep track of it as a DM in terms of they'll gain points for, obviously criminal activity, but just asking like suspicious activity, so snooping around if they're casting spells, if anything is witnessed by a guard. And then for all these for every threshold they reach, basically different things will happen. It's basically just guards like coming at them in terms of encounters around the city. But that is a nice little reactivity that occurs, rather than just telling your players, okay, you're being harried, and rather than just having random encounters be like, okay, you're fighting, guards all the time or whatever. This allows some kind of system, and I would probably be very open with my players, not telling them what threshold they're at, but just telling them like about this suspicion point system, and saying like, hey, everything you do will accrue these kind of points. So watch yourselves in this city. Be careful. Be spies. You want to motivate your players to be the spies. Anyway, their initial lead is to go follow up on this one character called Ganaeus. The problem is Ganaeus has been captured by a Rakshasa, and the Rakshasa has a whole bunch of Rakshasa agents, and he has left this trail of crumbs as a trap for anybody coming to the city. And he himself, because Rakshasas are shapeshifters, has transformed into that character. So the very first thing your players deal with is they go to this place, they find the note that says go to this other place to meet with him. They go to meet with him, and there's no map for the first place, which is fine because they just search this place and there's nothing there. There's nothing there but a note. So fine, we don't need a map. The next one, there's no map, which is a bummer because you need a map, which is this small coffee house and sweet shop. And it's literally just your players meet with whom they think is their one lead that they have, and it's a really interesting conversation they can have because, again, this is a disguised Rakshasa who is actually disguised as another character that he walks around town with and is working for Pathfinder, but he's also just God, it gets so confusing. He's disguised as Ganaeus for the purposes of talking to the PCs and trying to figure out what they know. The whole thing ends up as most likely a fight, and it even says and he actually poisons the character. They're all drinking coffee, and there's a classic scene where, yeah, haha, you're drinking the poison. So I'm trying to read it. Milan's, the name of the Rakshasa, is somebody Milan Jareth. And it says his overconfidence and lack of preparation means uniquely vulnerable in this encounter. Even if the PCs are unprepared, there's a good chance the PC can end his threat here and now. So the notes actually say that, yeah, a party of 10th level PCs, even if they're caught completely unsurprised and even if they're somewhat poisoned, will probably be able to defeat a single Rakshasa. Which is big because he's actually a pretty big character in this module. Not the campaign, just this module. He's like the head Rakshasa agent of a group, and he basically controls or works with all the various agencies in this city. But I like it because if the PCs are able to actually kill him, defeat him, there's actually rules for them disguising as him. Or because he disguises himself as different characters. There's a crazy Inception level. If your characters get really into the whole disguise thing, if you have some players that are really into that, you can go really far with this, which is fun. It makes me leery about essentially giving a villain over to the players in such an easy way. And it does mention he can't escape, and then they can find him later on. But either way, they need to be able to pick up the clues whether they defeat him or not, and that leads them to 3 other areas. Which these do finally have maps, thank goodness. That is the, let's see, Waterhill. What is this? The Waterhill Manor, which is essentially his base of operations. I guess we'll go there next. Might as well show all the maps. So these, finally, you do have maps for these locations, which is good. This is his map, which is just a mansion. These are all Rakshasas in disguise, all of his servants. There's the actual real Ganaeus. He's got, chained up and he's torturing. Otherwise, it's not terribly complex of a dungeon. There's nifty traps right here with the water outside with the bats. There's a giant water elemental in one, and the other one is a sinkhole that will drag the players down into a lair with a giant anaconda, also known as my wife's complete nightmare. But that's a fun little scenario. Otherwise, this is just where he hangs out. He's got just a bunch of Rakshasa agents. It seems like a pretty straightforward dungeon, unless your characters have absolutely no clue. But if they kill, I guess if they don't defeat him, then they wouldn't know. But otherwise, if they kill him, they realize he's a Rakshasa. Maybe they wouldn't know the servant. I don't know. But it's fine. But there's a ground floor and upper floor, and then there's a little basement with there's some undead servants kind of guarding this path. Which the path right here, the whole point of this is to basically find this underground vein where the spy network of Zamar works out of, which is to go to this 7 Forms of Sin monastery, which is another one that you need to check out. And each of these locations has a single, it's very similar to the last one where they all have a single piece of evidence, a MacGuffin, that you need to collect in order to essentially prove that the Maxillar Patharis character is an evil shitbag. And you need all those pieces of evidence before you can actually confront him and either arrest or assault him, because again, you have to work within the system. You have to work within the law of this city and country, which is an interesting twist because I think a lot of adventurers are just used to busting down the door and be like, we're adventurers, fuck the police, we don't need, we're just the vigilante heroes of this story. And this one you actually do have to work within the system. This one is pretty interesting. This is the Seven Forms of Sin Monastery. This is a monastery that that Milan Jarath, the Rakshasa guy, actually didn't form, but he was sent to in the past, and then kind of turned it to his own thing. And literally, it's like a hedonism cult because demons indulge, and he turns this monastery into like, just embrace all of your impulses and do whatever, and that's good for you. But you follow this vein, and there's a swamp naga here, I believe. Otherwise, it's kind of just a normal like underground barracks of like monks. It's not terribly interesting. It's a little interesting in terms of like you wouldn't find this normally in a city. This is a totally underground lair, but otherwise there's not a whole lot going on here. The swamp naga's got like a black pudding that she can sick on you. There's these weird anthropomorphized bug assassin things that attack you in this area. Otherwise, there's a bunch of barracks, and again, you'll find her evidence for condemning Patheris, who's trying to assassinate Eutropia. The other location is probably the weakest of them all, though has one of my favorite traps I've ever seen. In this toy shop, there's a bunch of night hags, which the Rakshasas have allied with, working for Patheris, and I guess they kind of work for Patheris. They also kind of work against him because they want all these monstrous characters want this civil war to happen because it weakens this country. So they're kind of working with Patheris, but to the extent that they want to undermine everything going on and just take advantage. So, but anyway, there's this night hag who's disguised as a tea shop. Sorry, not a toy shop. Which is kind of funny because they sell like all these sleep aids to people, which of course night hags want people to sleep so they can feast on their dreams. I find that funny. They have this nightmare horse in the back, which is kind of a cool creature. It can like zip in and out of planar travel. The coolest trap ever is on this doorway. You'll see there's a bunch of enemies called advanced cats, and that's like, okay, what the hell does that? Why is that cool? And there's a trap right here that literally turns characters into rats. So they get turned into a rat, and then they walk into a room and just fucking all cats everywhere. What I would do is probably put the cats more outside to tease them, to show the cats everywhere. So the player's like, all right, there's cats everywhere, whatever. And they turn into a rat, and they're like, oh shit, I'm a rat, and there's a bunch of cats everywhere. I just think that's hysterical. That's a funny trap. Traps that don't do straight damage, but instead add little wrinkles, like that sinkhole that brought him into Anaconda. Those are good traps. Otherwise, this is not a terribly interesting location again. And if there were more of these, that would be better. Like the last adventure, there was, they were all kind of mini locations, but there was like half a dozen of them. This one, you just have 4, I think. The Court of Filth is one too, but it doesn't have a map. So there's maybe 5. There's 5 in here, but only 3 of them have maps. The other 2, like I said, is that the actual coffee shop where you meet the Rakshasa, which turns into a big fight, and then this Court of Filth, which has a really neat character. You basically go into the sewers and talk to this massive sentient Achyug, which I didn't know Achyugs could even like talk to people. It is the big. I can pull up a picture. It's a big 3-legged. Yeah, these things are crazy looking. Look at that. How does that fucking talk? But you go have an audience, and of course it's that classic big like blubbering thing that wants you to pay fealty to it, and it's just nasty. And you can actually talk to it and get some information out of it, but of course you have to pay it and give it all kinds of stuff. There's a neat quest where it's like, bring me stuff for my lair, bring me a trap, bring me a guardian, bring me all this stuff, and the players can all do that. I don't know what players would ever do that besides just kill the fucking thing, because like literally 9 times out of 10 players are going to be like, you're a giant monster, we're just going to kill you and get what we need, which is probably what any players would do. But I love that it's there. Unfortunately, there is no map, and you could do a really cool sewer map, even if it's just one room. Like, if I'm playing this on Roll20, I'm going to have to make that. I'm going to have to make that little sewer room and put that Achyug in there and make that little scene. It's not there. You only have those 3 maps. But anyway, every single one of these locations will basically, except the first one that just leads to this one, but they all give you the evidence you need. You need, I think, 3 pieces of evidence total in order to essentially start Act 3, which is you contact your Lionblade agent. She says, okay, you got the go-ahead to move on Patheris now. We've got our, legally we can assault him. I don't think they actually give you any aid though, because it's basically just you're on your own, which is most of the case with when you're PCs. But it's a cool third act, and they give you. It's basically just one big ass dungeon crawl, which is an improvement over the last module. Everything else has been way weaker than the last one, but this third act is definitely, I think, an improvement. Look at the size of this map. This is Abdar's Pillar, which you can see has 40 total areas in one dungeon, and it's just a big castle. It is a castle in the middle of a river in the middle of this town, and is just incredibly fortified. I mean, this is like the general of the military of this country, so he has the biggest fortifications, and it seems like a classic, like almost like a heist film in terms of like how it sets up all their various defenses and all that's outlined really well. It's got the moat, it's got all these anti-spell protections. If you try to go from the air, this happens. You try to go from the water, this happens. Really, really cool setup. The players really have to plan out accordingly and figure out how to go about this. There's patrols everywhere. It's not terribly like it is a castle, like a Game of Thrones style castle. Like there's not a whole lot of like super natural stuff going on in here, like you would see in like a lot of D&D / Pathfinder / whatever fantasy campaigns. It is very much like there's just a bunch of knights patrolling the grounds. Essentially, there's the other two Night Hag sisters are here in disguise. There's a few things. There's like a golem or two guarding. I mean, look at the barracks have all these sentinels in here, which just high level guards essentially. But otherwise is not a lot of monsters, which is fine. I think it's just more like a realistic, like you were assaulting this guard castle full of fucking guards everywhere. This is a giant map. I mean, all these battlements, and let me get this out of the way. It's insanity. As we just look over this real quick. And it very much mentions that, like, if you attack head on, like, once the alarms ring, this, and this happens, and especially the final boss, which is Paththeris, doesn't just sit back in his final room waiting for the adventurers to bust in the door. He's got his guards with him, and they all come together at one point, and it even mentions, like, if he has the time to gather, like, all of his top lieutenants and meet the adventurers in the courtyard, it is, like, a straight-up, like, CR, like, 17 battle or something, so it behooves the players to do this as quietly as possible, which is really true of the entire module so far. They really stress, the clandestine spy approach, which I think is really fun and also tricky to do for high-level players because they're just so damn strong by then. But I like this third act. I think it's fun. It offers a fun climax. They're definitely going to feel like they have a nice showdown here. Yeah, it says, Paththeris is a mobile and tactically minded figure, always seeks advantageous terrain. He's a moving target. The PCs storm that keep at Abdar's Pillar, so it mentions him moving around. He might even be astride his horse Honor. You can verbally duel him, which I think was a thing back in the second module. You could verbally duel that final boss also, which is cool. There are rules for that, I believe, somewhere. It wasn't the second It wasn't the second module. I don't know if there's specific rules here, but that is definitely a thing. That's what this guy looks like. He looks like Vigo. A little bit of Vigo from Ghostbusters 2. But he's the final boss, and they take care of him, and they're done. There's not really a whole lot of twists here. They do find, assuming they thoroughly explore this castle, they actually find the Grand Prince, essentially the king of Taldor, whom you thought was slain in the the end of the first act of the first module, and that's the reason this whole civil war has started, because that guy went nuts and unleashed hell on his own Senate party and was killed in the process. He wasn't killed though. He was very near death, and then he was nursed back to life, and he's just being kept essentially by Paththeris because he's kind of insane and wounded and not able to lead, or even, and they just don't really know what to do with him. And really, for the PCs, and the adventure says, if you just want to kill him, you can. If you want to try to rescue him and turn him over to his daughter Eutropia, you can do that. Although she's going to be like, ugh. But that's pretty much the only twist involved here. I don't think the And again, I don't think the Rakshasa thing or even the Night Hags thing is that much of a twist, because I feel like players would see that a mile away, given that they've seen kind of similar things throughout this whole campaign, really. So I don't know. All in all, like, there's some fun stuff here. I like the suspicion point system. I mean, I'll go through my pros and cons, but yeah, overall, I feel like it's definitely a disappointment compared to the Twilight Child module, especially that one. That one is just with all the different maps and stuff. That one worked really well with Roll20, and this one, with a lack of maps, is the opposite. Unfortunately, the one saving grace, it does have a really cool final third act giant dungeon, but other than that, it's really lacking. All right, so let's go over pros and cons for the City in the Lion's Eye. Pro: there are numerous fun ways to exercise disguises, stealth, and subterfuge. I like the fact that you get like false IDs. You have to pretend to be different characters. You have to work on your suspicion system, which that's my second pro. Suspicion point system is a fun way to motivate players to play the spy game within this city. So the one thing is, the city is openly like hostile and more militaristic than the last city of Jan Maas. This one, they do have to actually watch what they're doing. They're being harassed by guards all the time. It's a lot more dangerous and problematic for them to be openly like tracking down clues and gathering evidence and kicking people's asses at these various locations. And I feel like that's reflected pretty well in that suspicion point system. And then the final pro is that I think the third act, the assault on this large castle of Abdar's Pillar, is really, really cool looking, and the PCs are really given free reign in how they want to tackle it, almost like a classic heist film, where they just have this big fortified location, and like, okay, how do we get in and do our thing? Although with the end result being, almost more of like a Hitman or Deus Ex or something, or like a stealth game, where instead of having to get in and get a piece of information, you have to get in and take out the head honcho of the castle, which basically is going to eventually lead to some kind of big fight, unless your players are super, super good at what they're doing. But it looks to be a challenging, which I guess it should be, because I think they're supposed to be level 12 by the end of this one. Cons. Part 1 has 0 maps, no maps whatsoever, nor even any player handouts. As a Roll20 module, that is just super awful. There's just absolutely nothing. I would have to do a lot of work to come up with a map for the Cathrodian Academy, at very least that few like combat scenarios. There's obviously a lot of encounters that can happen on the road to go from here to there if you want to choose to do that, and then at that little inn at the hamlet of Panamona, there's altercation there at the city gate. Like all these, like there's no maps for any of that, or even really like nice little artwork handouts or scenes of that either. So that's a big bummer. And then the con, there are only half the areas in part 2 have maps, which is the Waterhill Manor, the tea shop, and the underground monastery. You don't get the sewer map where there's an encounter, and you don't get the warehouse where you're first going to, and you also don't get the coffee shop. So there's just a big lack of maps in this module, and it's pretty shitty. The final con is, I just think the flow of the module is way too similar to what the PCs were just doing in the last module in Jan Maas, where they go to a city and they just go to all these different locations and gather evidence to take down a big like political villain. That's pretty much the same thing they did in the last module, and that's what they're doing here. And I get that that's part of the theme, is that you're moving political figures around, and so you're going to end up in cities more than in, out in the wilderness, but it just feels especially bad to have these two right back to back, going from doing everything in Jan Maas, and then you're just going to this different city and essentially doing the same stuff, but it's just slightly higher level, and the city is slightly more dangerous. I don't like that. Verdict: City in the Lion's Eye plays a bit too similar to the previous adventure in the War for the Crown, with a better third act, but far less maps and activities, making it a disappointing entry. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.